Joe Biden continues to be top of the news as the Democratic Party struggles to deal with the accusations that he's very touchy-feely. Now, I'll acknowledge that it's weird that for 8 years the media had nothing to say about this. Everybody on the right mocked Joe Biden incessantly for years for being the guy who would go to a diner and suddenly one of the constituents, the female constituents, would end up on his lap, the guy who would stroke the faces of other people. I mean, Joe Biden has been weird about this stuff for a very long time.
Keep my hands to myself.
I mean, this has been his theme for a very long time, and there is nothing new here. Now, there's a second woman claiming that Biden, quote, touched her inappropriately at a Greenwich fundraiser in 2009. But again, the headline here doesn't really match the story. This is from the Connecticut Courant. And basically, their argument is that this Connecticut woman said that Biden grabbed her by the back of the neck and then rubbed noses with her. Like, that's a weird thing to do, but is it a sexual thing to do? Is it like a sexual harassment thing to do? It's weird for sure. It's an invasion of personal space for sure, but Joe Biden has no limits. And Joe Biden has no limits when it comes to his speech. He just says anything. He has no limits when it comes to his personal behavior. He just touches people weirdly, but that's not the same thing as Al Franken grabbing a butt or a boob. So the kind of overblown controversy about Joe Biden being Joe Biden, it's just funny to watch as the standards change on him, and he is eminently confused about all of it, which, frankly, I think is appropriate considering that the standards did randomly change on him. Now, the Democrats are a lot more hesitant to throw Joe Biden off the cliff than they would be if this person were a Republican, obviously. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, she said, does this disqualify Joe Biden from the presidency? Nah, that's silly.
I think it's disqualifying. I think disqualifying is with what your intention is. I do think this about communication in general. I know Joe Biden a long time. My grandchildren love Joe Biden. I mean, he's an affectionate person to children, to senior citizens, to everyone. That's just the way he is.
Okay, so Nancy Pelosi basically saying he's been like this forever. Why are you all of a sudden proclaiming that he's doing something deeply terrible or inappropriate? And this seems to be sort of a bipartisan take. Like Laura Ingraham last night on her show, she said, listen, Biden has touched me before and it didn't bother me because he's not trying to sexually harass me.
I have to share with you just really quickly my own touch and go moment with Joe Biden. Okay, this is probably 10 years ago. I wrote about it in one of my books at a party in Washington. It was at George Will's house. And Biden saw me at the entranceway to the party. So Biden comes up to me, or I went up to him, I can't remember what, and he put his both hands on my shoulders, and he said, God's honest truth, Ingram, you're my favorite of the right-wing crazies, or something like that, to that effect. And he looked at me and he said, how you doing? And he was funny. It didn't bother me one bit, but that's kind of who he is. But now that's being used against him by the people who want to knock him out on the left. And I got to say, it's rich, but it's probably undeserved.
And that is pretty right by Laura Ingraham right there. It's not just from Laura Ingraham. Whoopi Goldberg on The View said the same thing. She said, it's kind of weird that the lady who first came out and said something about this, a woman named Lucy Flores, happens to be a supporter of Beto O'Rourke. She says, this happened 5 years ago. What are you sitting around waiting 5 years to talk about it? Now, I agree with all this. I'm just going to point out the insane irony of the same Whoopi Goldberg who said that Brett Kavanaugh should be kicked off the Supreme Court for a 30-year-old allegation without any evidence. That same Whoopi Goldberg is saying, why'd this lady wait even 5 years to talk about this supposed horror show that she experienced with Joe Biden?
Stephanie Carter, who is the wife of Defense Secretary Ash Carter, published a blog Sunday defending Joe Biden over a viral photo.
Yes,
this
because
viral photo.
People keep
she
misrepresenting
she was nervous.
That picture, Joe Biden knows them.
Yeah. Right.
He was behind her whispering to, so you have to stop characterizing stuff, mischaracterizing it. That's all.
So for her, it was a comfortable experience. For the other woman, it wasn't.
It was not. But don't sit and wait and say I'm uncomfortable on national television.
Right.
Because it makes us suspect of your
listen, you
your
and I
thoughts.
honestly.
Weird how that standard has now changed when it comes to Joe Biden. By the way, same standard has changed when it comes to Alyssa Milano. I thought the most ironic tweet of yesterday was Alyssa Milano tweeted out something about Joe Biden, how much she likes Joe Biden. She tweeted out a picture of herself with Joe Biden, suggesting that she and Joe Biden got along and that she'd never had these experiences with Joe Biden. Her actual tweet is a picture of her next to Joe Biden at some sort of event. And she says, quote, I am proud to call Joe Biden a friend. He has been a leader and a champion on fighting violence against women for many years, and I have been fortunate to accompany him to events with survivors, where he has listened to their stories, empathized with them, and comforted them. That's who Joe Biden is, a warm, generous individual who believes it's on all of us to pay attention to women's stories and experiences. Biden started It's on Us because he believes to meaningfully change our culture, everyone, including those often left out of the conversation, like college athletes and frat brothers, need to be part of the movement. Joe Biden's response that he never meant to make anyone uncomfortable and that he'll listen and learn from anyone who says otherwise is exactly the leadership we need to build a culture where women are heard and are equal. I respect Lucy Flores' decision to share her story and agree with Biden that we must all pay attention to it. But just as we must believe women that decide to come forward, we cannot assume all women's experiences are the same. I believe that Joe Biden's intent has never been to make anyone uncomfortable and that his kind, empathetic leadership is what our country needs, especially now. So ironic, because I remember Alyssa Milano getting in a Handmaid's Tale outfit and traveling over to the Supreme Court to proclaim that Brett Kavanaugh could not sit on the Supreme Court because of an old allegation with no supporting or verifiable evidence. I'm old enough to remember that because that was 6 months ago? Within 6 months, she has shifted her tune. And now her experiences with Joe Biden disprove the experiences of other women with Joe Biden. Again, I don't believe that Joe Biden is running around sexually harassing women. I don't. I think he's real touchy and I think he's a weird dude, but I don't think that he's running around sexually harassing women. I'm just pointing out that folks on the left have radically changed their standards. Because you'll remember that during the Kavanaugh hearings, Kavanaugh brought forward a letter from a bunch of former female colleagues who suggested that he was actually great with them. And the left said, well, that's not proof of anything. That's not proof that he's innocent. I mean, he could have been nice to these women and not nice to others. I mean, the same thing is true for Alyssa Milano, but you don't see the left saying the same sort of stuff. So there is a certain irony to the left's new attitude with regard to Joe Biden. But there's something deeper going on here, and that is the left seeking an excuse to make a break with Joe Biden. The hard left seeking an excuse to make a break with Joe Biden, which really is the left seeking to make an excuse for a hard break with Barack Obama. See, here's the thing about Joe Biden. He was not just a senator. If he'd just been a senator, he wouldn't have any shot in this election whatsoever. I mean, he tried in 1988. He tried again in 2008. He failed both times really miserably. Well, now he's running as the vice president to Barack Obama. So he's running with the sort of emblem of Obama on his shoulder. He's running as Barack Obama's third term. And the hard left is not supremely happy with it. It's kind of fascinating. They think that they've moved beyond Barack Obama. Barack Obama, for a lot of members of the intersectional left, was actually a way station. He was not the final form of the destructor. He was not the ideal. Barack Obama was just a moderate guy. And it's amazing how Barack Obama becomes a moderate in the minds of the Democratic Party. But now Barack Obama was a moderate guy with moderate policies, and we've moved beyond Barack Obama. We don't need him anymore. He was a stepping stone. In the same way that for every past president, they become moderate in hindsight, the same thing is now happening to Barack Obama, and the Democratic Party doesn't want moderate. So there are two separate columns in the New York Times today all about why this is the wrong time for Joe Biden. And basically, they both come from the same place, that Joe Biden is past his prime, that we don't need any more of this Obama shtick anymore. Michelle Goldberg, who's legitimately an awful columnist. I mean, the New York Times editorial page is filled with awful columnists. I'm hard-pressed to say that Michelle Goldberg is not even worse than Nicholas Kristof, which is one hell of a recommendation for her. She has a piece on April Fool's, this was from yesterday, called The Wrong Time for Joe Biden. He's not a sexual predator, but he is out of touch. Okay, so let's get this straight. He's not a sexual predator. He's not a sexual harasser, but he doesn't understand women properly, and therefore he cannot be president. Here's what Michelle Goldberg writes. On Friday, Lucy Flores, a former Democratic candidate for lieutenant governor of Nevada, accused Joe Biden of touching her inappropriately as they waited to take the stage at a 2014 election rally. He put his hands on her shoulders, she said, then nuzzled her hair and kissed the back of her head. She didn't accuse Biden, who's reportedly close to announcing his presidential candidacy, of sexual harassment or assault, just of making her uncomfortable. I'm not suggesting Biden broke any laws, but the transgressions that society deems minor or don't even see as transgressions often feel considerable to the person on the receiving end, she wrote. In response, Biden released a statement saying that while he's often been physically affectionate as a politician, not once, never did I believe I acted inappropriately. Then on Monday, Amy Lapos, a former aide to Democratic Congressman Jim Himes, told the Hartford Courant that Biden pulled her toward him to rub noses during a 2009 fundraiser. There's absolutely a line of decency, Lapos said, adding crossing that line is not grandfatherly, it's not cultural, it's not affection, it's sexism or misogyny. Biden's campaign hadn't yet begun and was already in crisis. Flores, Lapos, and Biden, says Michelle Goldberg, are probably all telling the truth. There are countless photos of Biden behaving in the ways Flores and Lapos described, squeezing women, rubbing their shoulders, leaning in too close. All this was open, not furtive, presumably because it never occurred to Biden he was doing anything untoward. I don't necessarily blame him. In the past few years, women have been calling out daily indignities that previous generations grew up quietly tolerating. Lingering hugs from boss, embarrassing intimate questions, crude office jokes. Individually, these are small acts, and most men probably don't understand how cumulatively draining they can be. Women, after all, have only recently begun to articulate it. I received plenty of unwanted shoulder massages when I was younger, and for a long time I assumed there was something wrong with me when they made me flinch. It was affirming to finally realize that other women also hated routine invasions of their personal space. But if it wasn't always obvious to me that the men were at fault in these awkward encounters, it might not have been obvious to them either. So I don't think that Biden's avuncular pawing is a Me Too story. But if Biden was more oblivious than predatory, his history still puts him out of step with the mores of an increasingly progressive Democratic Party. And here is where we get to the crux of the matter. And so Biden has a problem. I've been saying for legitimately weeks on this program, the best day for Joe Biden is the first day for Joe Biden. Every day after that is a worse day for Joe Biden. And if he thinks that Barack Obama is going to provide cover to him, he's got another thing coming. Obama is not going to endorse him in a primary. And that means that Biden is out there on his own. Biden has logorrhea. He runs on at the mouth all the time. He has diarrhea of the face. The man says things on a routine basis. I know we all pretend that Joe Biden is some sort of elder statesman. Joe Biden has a long record of saying dumb stuff. All the way back in 2008, you will recall that he famously called Barack Obama a different kind of African-American presidential candidate, clean and articulate. That's the person who Joe Biden is when he is on the campaign trail. Do we really think he's not going to make those kind of gaffes again? And there's also another point, which is even if Barack Obama were to endorse Joe Biden, would that be enough to put Joe Biden over the top? Because there is a gap between the base of the Democratic Party and the mainstream of the Democratic Party. The progressive, woke left of the Democratic Party, which is disproportionately white, by the way, not minority. A lot of those folks are not particularly fond of Barack Obama. They see Barack Obama in the same way that, for example, Ilhan Omar has described Barack Obama as a guy who was droning terrorists in foreign countries and was too conciliatory toward Republicans. Yes, that's a wild rewriting of history, but that doesn't matter to a lot of the progressives in the base. So when Eric Holder, the former Barack Obama Attorney General, goes out in public and he says things like, Trump will be seen as one of the worst presidents, Barack Obama will be seen as one of the best, I don't know how many members of the Democratic Party base actually agree with this. This is him with Ari Melber on MSNBC yesterday.
Last two, Donald Trump. We just got to survive these next 22 months or so. I think he is in danger of being the worst president in the history of the United States.
Barack Obama.
History is going to be extremely kind to Barack Obama. I don't say this because I was his friend or I was his attorney general. I studied American history. Over time, the estimation of him by historians will rise. It's already begun. He is going to be a top five.
Okay, so that may be true for the moment for older Democrats, but already Barack Obama is fading into the gauzy kind of sepia gaze of history, and he is no longer considered the leading edge of the woke brigade. He's been left behind. Eric Holder is trying desperately to grab that mantle. He's desperately trying to keep the focus on Barack Obama as leader of change. But the fact is that that's not something that I think a lot of Democrats are resonating to, which is why they are moving over toward Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's why they are moving over toward Bernie Sanders. It's why everybody who's discounting Bernie Sanders in these primaries, I think, is getting this stuff completely wrong. I think that if you are really already dismissing Bernie Sanders, you're getting this stuff absolutely incorrect. There's a poll out today that shows that Bernie Sanders has a double-digit lead among young voters. Bernie Sanders explicitly rejects the legacy of Barack Obama. And Bernie Sanders is a full-on statist socialist. He likes to proclaim that he's in favor of Norway. I mean, dude was in favor of the USSR when the USSR was still around. Dude was campaigning for Venezuela like 10 years ago. But he has a double-digit lead among young voters in the 2020 Democratic presidential primary, according to a poll released on Monday. 31% of likely voters between 18 and 29 favor him. Joe Biden trailing at 20%. That's a terrible number for Joe Biden among young voters.